A mountain man buys a cabin for $11 and steps inside to find a Chinese girl hanging from the rafters, still alive, but barely. In a town where whispers travel faster than the wind, saving her means crossing men who'd rather see or vanish. The mine bosses want her gone. The sheriff warns him to hand her over, and hidden in her tattered dress lies something worth more than gold, something men will kill for. As boots close in on the cabin and the noose's shadow still lingers, one question burns hotter than the stove fire. Can he keep her alive long enough to uncover the truth? Or will the mountain claim them both? Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know where you are watching from. Seeing your comments really reminds me why I do this every day. The morning sun cast long shadows across Whitestone's empty streets as Elias Creed led his pack mule down the dusty thoroughfare. His boots crunched on frost-covered dirt, the April chill biting through his worn coat. Shop windows stare back at him like hollow eyes, most of their glass clouded or cracked. A tattered wanted poster fluttered against a post, its edges curled. By mountain wind's dawn, the courthouse bell tolled 7 times, its lonely sound echoing off the surrounding peaks. Elias paused, noting the cluster of people gathering around a wooden sign that read, "Tax auction today." He hadn't planned to stop long in Whitestone, just enough to resupply before heading back into the high country. But something about that sign tugged at him. Next up, Sheriff Raleigh's voice carried across the morning air. Lot 17. Cabin on North Slope, abandoned these past 8 months. The sheriff adjusted his hat, squinting at his ledger. Starting bid at $10. The assembled townspeople shuffled their feet, a few whispers passing between them. An old-timer spat into the dirt. "That place is cursed, sure as sunrise," he muttered. "Found the last owner face down in Bear Creek." $10, Raleigh repeated, his tone growing impatient. "Do I hear $10? Elias studied the crowd's unease. His years as an army scout had taught him to read people as well as he read terrain. Their nervousness spoke of more than just superstition. $11, Elias called out, his voice rough from disuse. Silence fell. Sheriff Raleigh's eyes narrowed as he assessed the stranger before him. $11 bid. Any advance? He paused, scanning the crowd. Going once, twice, sold to the gentleman in the buckskins. Elias approached the courthouse steps, fishing $11 from his belt pouch. The sheriff's fingers were ink-stained as he wrote out the receipt, his movements deliberate and slow. "Might want to reconsider, stranger," Raleigh said, quietly as he handed over the paper. "That cabin's got a dark history. Appreciate the warning." Elias replied, tucking the receipt into his shirt pocket. He turned away, leading his mule toward the general store. The morning shopping was quick: coffee, salt, ammunition. By mid-morning, he was following a narrow trail up the North Slope. The climb was steady, the trail switchbacking through stands of pine and aspen. His mule picked its way carefully over loose rocks and exposed roots. As they gained elevation, the April wind grew sharper, carrying the bite of lingering snow from higher peaks. Around mid-afternoon, Elias spotted the cabin through the trees. It was a simple structure, pine boards weathered gray, a stone chimney leaning slightly. A rusted coffee pot lay overturned by the door, and deer tracks crossed the small clearing. Dismounting, Elias approached the cabin. The door stuck in its frame, warped by seasons of weather. He set his shoulder against it, pushing until the wood groaned and gave way. Stale air rushed out, carrying the musty scent of abandonment and something else, something that made his neck hairs rise. The cabin's single room was dim, dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light that penetrated the grimy window. Elias's eyes swept the space: overturned table, broken chair, ashes cold in the hearth. Then his gaze traveled upward, and his breath caught. A figure hung from the central beam, suspended by a frayed rope. Long black hair obscured the face, but the small frame and delicate hands told him it was a woman. For a heartbeat, Elias stood frozen, his mind flashing back to another death, another failure, his sister, so many years ago. Then he saw it, the smallest twitch of fingers. "Dear God," he breathed, dropping his rifle. 3 long strides took him across the cabin. He drew his knife, reaching up to saw through the rope while supporting the woman's weight with his other arm. The rope parted with a snap, and she collapsed. Against him, lighter than she should be, Elias lowered her gently to the floor, brushing the hair from her face. She was young, Chinese by her features, her skin ashen but warm. Her pulse fluttered weakly against his fingers like a trapped bird. Looking at her, Elias felt something shift inside him, a door long closed, creaking open. He'd bought this cabin. On impulse, following some instinct he couldn't name. Now he knew why. This wasn't just about property or a place to winter. This was about redemption, about not failing another soul who needed help. The woman's eyelids flickered, and a soft sound escaped her throat. Elias reached for his canteen. Whatever had brought her to this desperate moment, whoever had left her for dead, one thing was certain: she wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. Elias carried Lin Mei to the cabin's only bunk, laying her down as bestow, gently as a fallen bird. The threadbare blanket crackled with dust and age, but it was better than the cold floor. Her throat bore angry red marks from the rope, and her breathing came in shallow gasps that made his chest tighten with worry. The rusted wood stove stood in the corner, its pipe leading up through the roof. Elias found an old pot among the cabins, scattered belongings, and filled it with snow from outside. His fingers worked quickly, building a fire from kindling and a few dry logs stacked by the hearth. Soon, the stove's iron belly glowed orange, warming the single room. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. Her English was broken, each syllable a struggle. "Please ... water." Elias held his canteen to her cracked lips, letting her take small sips. Her hands trembled as she reached for the container, but he kept his grip steady. "Easy now," he murmured. "Not too fast." When the snow had melted, he soaked a clean bandana in the warm water and began rubbing her hands, trying to restore circulation. Her fingers were ice cold, the nails tinged blue. As warmth returned, she winced at the pins and needles sensation. "Lin Mei," she said suddenly, her dark eyes finding his. "My name ... Lin Mei." Elias nodded, continuing his careful ministrations. "I'm Elias Creed. You're safe now." Through halting words and gestures, Lin Mei pieced together her story. A man had promised her work in Leadville, cooking, cleaning, honest labor, but it had been a lie. He tried to sell her to a brothel. When she'd refused, fought back. Her voice trailed off, and she touched her throat, tears gathering in her eyes. The wind picked up as night fell, moaning through gaps in the cabin's boards like a hungry ghost. Elias kept the stove fed, watching as Lin Mei drifted between consciousness and fevered sleep. Each time she startled awake, her eyes would search the shadows until they found him, still standing guard. He draped his coat over her thin frame when she started shivering. The wool was warm but warm, and she clutched it close, burying her face in its familiar scent of tobacco and pine. Through the long hours, Elias remained vigilant, his mind turning over the gravity of what he'd stumbled into as the first gray. Light of dawn crept through the grimy window. Elias checked on Lin Mei. Her breathing was steadier, but her skin felt hot to the touch. She needed medicine, proper care, not just his rough attempt at nursing. "I'll return soon," he told her, though he wasn't sure she heard through her fever. He saddled his horse, leaving his mule to guard the cabin, and rode down the mountain. Trail toward Whitestone. The general store was just opening when he arrived, the storekeeper's wife sweeping the wooden walkway. The bell above the door jangled as Elias entered, his boots leaving dusty prints on the newly swept floor. "Need medicine," he said, approaching the counter. "Fever powders, if you've got them. Bandages, too." Mrs. Henderson's thin lips pressed together as she gathered the items. Her eyes narrowed when he added a tin of coffee and some dried beef to his purchase. "I heard you bought the Norton cabin yesterday," she said, her voice low. "Also heard there might be some unexpected company up there." Elias met her gaze steadily, laying coins on the counter. "Best you don't get involved, Creed," she continued, pushing the supplies toward him. "Chinese trouble ain't worth $1. Those people bring nothing but grief to decent folk." The muscles in Elias's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Much obliged for the supplies, ma'am." He gathered his purchases and walked out, the bell's cheerful ring a sharp contrast to the sour taste in his mouth. The ride back up the slope seemed longer, each hoofbeat echoing the weight of his decision. He'd known, cutting Lin May down from that rope, that he was stepping into something bigger than himself. Mrs. Henderson's words confirmed it. Helping. This woman would make him enemies. When he pushed open the cabin door, Lin May's eyes tracked his movement from beneath heavy lids. She was still breathing, still fighting. A slight smile touched her lips when she recognized him, and something in Elias's chest loosened at the sight. He set about preparing the fever powder, mixing it with water from his canteen. The morning sun slanted through the window, catching dust motes in its beam, while outside, spring birds called to each other in the pine branches. In this moment of quiet, Elias could almost pretend this was just another morning in the mountains. But the woman watching him from the bunk and the rope he'd cut still lying coiled in the corner told a different story. The afternoon sun warmed the cabin's weathered boards as Elias surveyed the work ahead. Dust and neglect had claimed every surface, and the musty smell of decay hung in the air. He found an old broom in the corner and began sweeping, raising clouds that made him cough. Mouse droppings scattered across the floorboards, and patches of mold spotted the abandoned bedding like a disease. "Need to clean this place proper," he muttered, more to himself than to Lin May. She watched from the bunk, still wrapped in his coat, as he dragged the rotting bedding outside. The fresh mountain air helped clear away the cabin's stale atmosphere. When he returned, he pulled jerky from his saddlebag, his last few pieces of dried venison. Lin May shook her head when he offered it, though her eyes followed the food. "You need strength," Elias said, holding out the meat. Again, she refused, her thin fingers plucking at his coat's worn sleeve. Understanding dawned on him. He pulled up the room's only chair, sat down beside the bunk, and broke the jerky in half. Only when he took the first bite did Lin May accept her portion, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. As they shared the simple meal, Lin May's expression grew serious. She pointed toward the floor near the hearth, her hand trembling with the effort. "There," she whispered. "Under." Elias crossed to where she indicated, his boots creaking on the old pine boards. One plank moved slightly under his weight, looser than its neighbors. He knelt and worked his knife blade into the gap, prying upward. The board lifted easily, revealing a dark space beneath. A small bundle lay wrapped in faded cotton, no bigger than his fist. Elias retrieved it and brought it to Lin May. Her fingers shook as she unwrapped the cloth, revealing a carefully folded paper and a square of emerald silk embroidered with golden thread. Before she could explain, the hollow sound of hoofbeats echoed outside. Lin May's hands clutched the bundle to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Elias moved swiftly, positioning himself between the door and the bunk, his rifle close at hand. The door swung open without a knock. Sheriff Raleigh stepped inside, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. His badge caught the afternoon light, but his eyes remained in shadow beneath his heavy brows. "Afternoon, Creed," Raleigh said, his gaze sliding past Elias to Lin May. "Heard you had yourself an unexpected guest." "Sheriff." Elias kept his voice neutral, one hand resting on his rifle stock. Raleigh took another step into the cabin, boots leaving dusty prints on the newly swept floor. "Got some concerned citizens in town. Mine owners, specifically. They're powerful uneasy about a survivor being up here in your place." "That so?" "Indeed." The sheriff's fingers drummed against his hat brim. "Way I see it, simplest thing would be to hand her over quiet. Let proper authorities sort this business out." His tone was friendly, but his meaning was clear as mountain water. Elias shifted his weight, angling himself more firmly between Raleigh and the bunk. "Much obliged for your concern, Sheriff. But the lady's staying here. That's not wise, Creed." Raleigh's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Town's peace is a delicate thing. Be a shame if trouble came looking for you up here." "I reckon trouble's already been here," Elias replied softly. "Left its mark, too." The sheriff's face hardened. He settled his hat back on his head, touching the brim in a mockery of respect. "Consider yourself warned, Creed. Some fights ain't worth picking." He turned and left, letting the door bang shut behind him. Elias watched through the window until Raleigh's horse disappeared down the trail. Then he moved methodically around the cabin, checking the door's lock and the window's latch. He placed his rifle within easy reach of the floor where he'd sleep, close to Lin May's bunk. As darkness fell, the cabin grew cold despite the banked fire in the stove. Elias spread his bedroll on the rough floorboards, his back against the bunk frame. Above him, he heard Lin May's soft voice speaking Chinese words he couldn't understand, but her tone carried all the fear he needed to know. He lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the mountain, the cry of a distant coyote, wind in the pines, the settling of old timber. Each creak and groan kept him alert, wondering if Raleigh's warning would turn to action before dawn. The bundle Lin May had found remained clutched in her hands, its secrets still untold. But that mystery could wait. For now, Elias focused on the more immediate concern of keeping them both alive through the night. The morning sun painted long shadows across the cabin's weathered porch as Elias hefted 2 empty wooden buckets. Lin May watched from the doorway, her slight frame wrapped in his old blanket, as he checked his rifle and slung it across his back. "Won't be gone long," he said, his voice gentle. "Need fresh water." She nodded, understanding the word water, at least. Her dark eyes scanned the tree line, sharing his wariness of what might lurk in the shadows. The creek lay a quarter-mile down the slope, hidden in a shallow ravine thick with aspens. Elias moved carefully, staying close to cover, his boots silent, on the pine needle carpet. Every few steps, he paused to listen and look around. Birds scattered from a distant branch, but was it just the wind or something else that startled them? The creek's gentle burble masked other sounds, making him extra cautious as he filled the buckets. Cold water numbed his hands while his eyes kept moving, searching for signs of watchers. The hair on his neck refused to settle. Back at the cabin, he found Lin May had managed to drag the room's only chair closer to the pot-bellied stove. She sat wrapped in the blanket, some color finally returning to her cheeks. The morning sun streaming through the window caught hints of copper in her black hair. Elias set the water buckets down and stoked the fire. Lin May watched him work, then began a series of careful gestures. She mimicked stirring a pot, then pointed to herself and the cabin. "You cooked here?" Elias asked. She nodded eagerly. "Before, for him." She pointed to the ground, then made a walking motion with her fingers. "Snow come. He go." Her hand drifted away, like someone vanishing. "Not return." Elias nodded slowly, understanding. The cabin's owner disappeared in the winter. Her face darkened as she continued the story through gesture and broken English. After the owner vanished, others came. Bad men. Her hands trembled as she mimed their arrival, and she hugged herself tightly, unable to continue. The fear in her eyes told Elias all he needed to know about what those men had done, or tried to do. "There's a Chinese mission in the rail town," he offered carefully. 2 days' ride. Good people there. They could help. Lin Mei's reaction was immediate and violent. She shook her head hard, black hair flying, and pressed herself back against the chair. "No, no mission." Raw terror filled her voice. "They find there. Always find." "All right," Elias said quickly, raising his hands. "All right, you can stay here." She relaxed slightly, though her fingers still gripped the blanket tight. To break the tension, Elias pulled his hunting knife and showed her the squirrel he'd shot earlier that morning. Her eyes brightened at the sight of fresh meat. Working together, they prepared a simple stew. Lin Mei's cooking experience showed in the way she handled the knife, efficiently cleaning and cutting the meat. She found wild onions growing near the porch and added them to the pot with a pinch of salt from Elias's supplies. As evening settled over the mountain, they shared a meal in comfortable silence. The stew was better than anything Elias had managed on his own, and he told her so with an appreciative nod that made her smile briefly. The smile vanished as a twig snapped outside. Elias set his tin bowl down silently and reached for his rifle. Lin Mei froze, her eyes fixed on the door. With practiced quiet, Elias moved to the window and peered out into the gathering dusk. Nothing moved in the immediate clearing, but his instincts screamed that something was wrong. He took his rifle and eased the door open, stepping onto the porch with careful deliberation. The soft earth around the cabin told the story. Fresh boot prints, not his own, led from the tree line to within a few feet of the cabin's wall, then curved away into the woods. Whoever had made them had been close enough to hear their quiet conversation, close enough to peer through the gaps in the cabin's boards, and they hadn't announced themselves or knocked. Just watched. Waited. Elias followed the tracks to the edge of the clearing, but the fading light made it impossible to track them further into the dense timber. He completed a circuit around the cabin, finding no other signs of intrusion, then returned inside. Lin Mei stood exactly where he'd left her, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. She read the concern in his face and whispered something in Chinese that sounded like a prayer. Elias threw the heavy wooden bolt across the door and checked the window latches. "Someone was out there," he said quietly, watching. She nodded as if she'd expected this, fear and resignation mingling in her expression. Together they listened to the mountain night, wondering if their uninvited visitor would return. The rain started just after nightfall, a steady drumming on the cabin's pine-shake roof. Each gust of wind drove drops through gaps in the boards, creating tiny puddles on the floor. Elias placed buckets to catch the worst leaks while Lin Mei huddled near the stove, watching the water drip. Morning brought gray skies and mist clinging to the mountainside. Elias stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, studying the softened earth where last night's boot prints had been. The rain had washed them away, along with any other signs of their visitor. He went inside and retrieved his spare Colt revolver from his saddlebags. Lin Mei looked up from where she was sweeping, her eyes fixing on the weapon. "Time you learn to use this," he said, checking that it was unloaded. "For protection when I'm not here." She set the broom aside and approached cautiously. Elias demonstrated how to hold the revolver, explaining each part in simple terms. Despite her slight frame and recent ordeal, her hands were remarkably steady as she gripped the weapon. "Like this?" she asked, mimicking his stance. "Good." He nodded, pleased by her quick understanding. "Trigger here. Never point at anything. You don't aim to shoot." They spent an hour practicing with the empty gun. Proper grip, aim, the mechanics of loading and unloading. Lin Mei absorbed every detail, her face set in concentration. When Elias finally loaded it with actual bullets, her movements remained precise and controlled. "Keep it close," he told her, setting the revolver on the table. "But I hope you never need it." The afternoon found Elias outside, patching holes in the cabin's wall where rain had seeped through. As he worked, his mind kept returning to the deed they'd found under the floorboard. He pulled it from his shirt pocket and studied it more carefully in the daylight. The document was properly notarized, dated 3 months prior. The missing miner had signed over rights to a mountain spring to Lin May. Elias knew enough about water rights to understand why someone might kill for such a thing. A reliable spring could mean the difference between fortune and ruin for the mines below. He glanced at Lin May through the window, watching her mend one of his spare shirts with neat, careful stitches. The pieces were starting to fit together. Her presence in the cabin, the attempt on her life, the watching eyes in the woods, the sound of hooves on the trail interrupted his thoughts. A woman rode toward the cabin on a gleaming bay horse, a red parasol held aloft despite the cloudy sky. Her dark green riding dress spoke of money, as did the silver trim on her saddle. Clara Finch. Elias had heard talk of the brothel madam in town, though he'd never met her. She reined up at the porch, her painted lips curved in a practice to smile. "Mr. Creed," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "I hope I'm not interrupting your repairs." "Ma'am." He set his hammer down, but didn't move closer. Clara's eyes kept sliding past him to the cabin window, where Lin May stood watching. "I heard you taking in a guest. Very charitable of you. She's not causing any trouble." "Oh, I'm sure she isn't." Clara adjusted her parasol. "But surely a man like yourself has better things to do than play nursemaid. I could take her off your hands. Pay you well for your trouble, too." Elias saw Lin May's shoulders tense through the window. "She's not for sale. Everything has its price, Mr. Creed." Clara's smile remained, but her eyes hardened. "Better to handle this quietly, between reasonable people." "Much obliged for your concern," Elias said flatly, but the answer's still no. Clara studied him for a long moment, then shrugged delicately. "As you wish, but do remember my offer. Things can get difficult for those who don't understand how things work in Whitestone." She turned her horse, parasol tilting gracefully. "Good day, Mr. Creed. Do think on what I said." Elias watched until she disappeared down the trail, her red parasol bobbing between the trees like a drop of blood. When he went inside, Lin May had sunk into the chair by the stove, her face pale. "You know her?" he asked quietly. Lin May nodded. She buy girls. Sell girls." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "Bad place. Many cry there." Elias touched the deed in his pocket, understanding growing clearer. This wasn't just about a Chinese girl anymore. Clara Finch and others wanted something more valuable than human flesh. They wanted the water that could make or break the mine's future. He added more wood to the stove while Lin May sat silent, lost in dark memories. The afternoon light faded early under the cloudy sky, shadows gathering in the cabin's corners like secrets waiting to be told. Dawn brought clearer skies, and Elias wasted no time getting to work on the cabin's leaky roof. The collapsed shed behind the cabin provided weathered but solid boards, and he hauled them up one by one. The April sun warmed his back as he hammered, the sharp reports echoing across the mountainside. From his perch, he watched Lin May venture into the meadow below. Her steps were stronger now, though still careful. She moved with purpose, stooping occasionally to gather something from among the fresh grass. The sight eased his mind. It was good to see her gaining strength, finding her way around the land. By midday, he had replaced the worst sections of the roof. Sweat dampened his shirt despite the mountain breeze. The work reminded him of helping his pa repair their Missouri barn years ago, before the war changed everything. Simple work, honest work. It felt right. Lin Mei returned with her apron full of wild onions, their green stems still fresh with morning dew. She laid them out on the rough table, sorting through them with practiced hands. When Elias came down from the roof, she pointed to his hunting rifle. "Need meat," she said, "for soup." He raised an eyebrow but nodded, understanding her intent. An hour's hunting brought back a young deer, and Lin Mei's eyes lit up at the sight. She set to work immediately, her small hands swift and sure with the butchering knife. The afternoon passed in comfortable quiet as she prepared the meal. Elias continued his repairs, but found himself pausing often to watch her work. She moved about the cabin like she belonged there, hanging herbs to dry, stirring the pot that soon filled the air with rich aromas. "Smells good," he said when she finally ladled the stew into tin bowls. The venison had been cut into small pieces, tender from long simmering with the wild onions and what looked like pine needles and other plants he couldn't name. They sat at the table, steam rising between them. Lin Mei waited until he took the first bite before starting her own portion. The flavors were unlike anything he'd tasted, familiar yet different. The meat enhanced by herbs he'd walked past 100 times without knowing their worth. Dark clouds gathered as they ate, and thunder rolled in the distance. Lin Mei glanced at the window, her shoulders tensing slightly. The cabin had grown dim enough that Elias lit the oil lamp, its gentle light creating a small circle of warmth between them. "Why?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft but clear. "Why you help me?" Elias set down his spoon, considering his words carefully. The question had been coming. He knew, from the way she watched him sometimes, trying to understand. "I had a sister once," he said finally, his voice rough with memory. "Sarah, younger than you, back in Missouri during the war. He paused, the old pain rising like creek water after rain. "Mad men came. I was away scouting. By the time I got back..." Lin Mei reached across the table, her small hand resting briefly on his weathered one. The gesture said more than words could have. "So, when I found you..." He cleared his throat. "Couldn't stand by. Not again." She nodded, understanding in her dark eyes. "My family... in China. Lost them too." Her fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "Sometimes, better to make new family." The storm broke over the mountain then, rain hammering the newly repaired roof. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in stark bursts. They finished their meal in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of those they'd lost, and perhaps what they'd found. Elias gave Lin Mei the bunk as usual, while he made his bed on the floor nearby. The rain's steady drumming had nearly lulled him to sleep when another sound caught his attention. The subtle scrape of boot leather against wood, barely audible above the storm. He reached for his rifle, moving silently to his feet. Lin Mei's breathing remained steady. She was truly asleep for once, and he was glad. The door handle moved slightly, testing. Elias stood in the shadows, rifle ready, watching. Minutes stretched out like hours as he waited, but whoever was outside made no further attempt to enter. He maintained his vigil until false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Only then did he permit himself to relax slightly, though he kept the rifle close. When full morning arrived, he found fresh, muddy boot prints on the porch, proof he hadn't imagined a nighttime visitor. Lin Mei saw them too as she stepped out to fetch water. She said nothing, but her hand strayed to the revolver he'd given her, now kept in the pocket of her apron. Their eyes met in silent understanding. The danger was real and growing closer. 2 mornings after the night visitor, Elias watched the sunrise paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold. His decision had settled firm during the long night hours. They couldn't stay here, not with danger circling closer each day. The cabin had served its purpose as a temporary shelter, but now it felt more like a trap. He found Lin Mei already awake. tending the small fire in the hearth. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. Without a word, she began gathering her few belongings into a bundle. The silk cloth, the precious deed, and the clothes they'd managed to piece together from odds and ends. "Iron Bend," Elias said, checking his rifle's action. 2 days' ride. There's a Chinese mission there. Reverend Hale's place. You'll be safer." Lin Mei nodded, her face solemn but determined. While she packed the last of their food, Elias went to saddle his horse and pack mule. The morning air bit sharp and clean, his breath forming clouds in the chill. Recent rains had left the ground soft, which meant careful going on the mountain trails. Before mounting up, Elias wrapped his heavy coat around Lin Mei's shoulders. It dwarfed her small frame, but would keep her warm on the ride. She accepted the gesture with quiet dignity, climbing onto the horse with more grace than he expected. The sun had barely cleared the trees when they set out, leaving the cabin to its ghosts. The trail wound down through pine forests, still dripping from yesterday's rain. Mud sucked at the animals' hooves, forcing them to pick their way carefully along the track. Elias led them on foot, reading the ground for the safest path. By midday, they'd covered less distance than he'd hoped, but he wouldn't risk a lamed horse by pushing too hard. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow, where thick stands of aspen blocked the wind. Elias built a small fire, keeping it low and feeding it dry wood to minimize smoke. The flames cast dancing shadows on the trunk of a fallen tree, where they sat to eat their simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits. As night settled over the mountains, Lin Mei began to hum softly, a gentle, flowing melody that made Elias think of summer evenings on his family's farm, his mother singing as she mended by lamplight. The tune carried him back across the years, before war and loss had scattered them all to the winds. "Song from home," Lin Mei explained when she caught him listening. "Mother teach me, long ago." Her voice held both sweetness and sorrow, like honey mixed with bitter herbs. Elias nodded, understanding how music could bridge the vast distances between then and now, here and there. He kept watch through the night, letting Lin Mei sleep wrapped in his coat near the dying embers. The second day dawned clear, the mud beginning to firm under a bright sun. They made better time, though Elias remained cautious, scanning the trail ahead and behind for signs of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, Iron Bend's church spire came into view, rising above the cluster of buildings that marked the rail town. The mission sat at the quiet end of town, a weathered wooden cross marking its purpose. As they approached, a lean man in a black coat emerged from the doorway. Reverend Samuel Hall, his gentle face creased with welcome. "Mr. Creed," the Reverend said, helping Lin Mei down from the horse. "Word reached us you might be coming this way. Please, come inside where it's warm." The mission's main room smelled of wood smoke and cooking rice. An older Chinese woman looked up from her work at a table and suddenly froze, her eyes wide with recognition. "Lin Mei?" she whispered in disbelief. Lin Mei's hand flew to her mouth. "Cousin Jiang?" Her voice broke on the words. The two women rushed together, embracing with tears streaming down their faces. Their words tumbled out in rapid Chinese, years of separation dissolving in a flood of emotion. Reverend Holly smiled, dabbing at his own eyes with a handkerchief. "Her cousin Jiang Li arrived last month," he explained quietly to Elias. "She believed her entire family lost in the troubles back home. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Mr. Creed." Elias watched the reunion, his chest tight with something between joy and ache. Lin Mei's face shone with a happiness he hadn't seen before, the shadow of fear finally lifting from her eyes. Here, among her own people, with family she'd thought forever lost, she might find more than just safety. She might find home again. The mission's dining room buzzed with quiet conversation as families gathered for the evening meal. Steam rose from bowls of fragrant rice and vegetables. the familiar aromas bringing a genuine smile to Lin Mei's face. Elias watched from his place at the long wooden table as she spoke animatedly with her cousin Jiang Li, their words flowing back and forth in Chinese, punctuated by soft laughter and occasional tears. Other families welcomed Lin Mei with gentle touches and shared dishes, passing bowls of stewed greens and dried fish. Children peeked shyly at her from behind their mother's skirts, while the adults offered quiet words of sympathy when they learned of her ordeal. Their acceptance wrapped around her like a warm blanket, easing some of the tension from her shoulders after the meal. While Lin Mei helped the women clear the tables, Reverend Hale led Elias to his small office. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over the cramped space, their light reflecting off the mission's iron safe in the corner. "This deed troubles me," Reverend Hale said, studying the document through his wire-rimmed spectacles. "A mountain spring can be worth more than gold out here, especially to the mining operations. No wonder they're so keen to drive her off." Elias nodded, running a calloused hand over his beard. "Figured as much. That's why I brought it here." "We can keep a copy in the safe," the Reverend offered, moving to his desk. "I'll make it myself right now. That way, if anything happens to the original, there's still proof of her claim." He carefully copied every detail onto fresh paper, his neat script flowing across the page. They slept that night in simple rooms, Elias on a narrow cot in the mission's back room, listening to the quiet settling of the building and the distant whistle of a late train. At dawn, Jiang Li prepared a hearty breakfast of rice porridge and dried fruit, pressing extra portions on Lin Mei. "You stay here," Jiang Li urged in her careful English, holding her cousin's hands. "Safe here. Family here." But Lin Mei shook her head, her expression gentle but firm. "Cannot hide in town," she said. "Not safe if they find me. Better in hills with Mr. Creed." She squeezed her cousin's hands. "We'll visit again soon." Tears slipped down Jiang Li's cheeks as she embraced Lin Mei one final time. Reverend Hale handed Elias both the original deed and the copy, each carefully wrapped in oilcloth. "God be with you both," he said softly. The morning air held a sharp chill as they mounted up, the spring sun not yet strong enough to warm the shadows. Lin Mei turned once to wave at the small group gathered by the mission door, then faced forward, her back straight and determined. Their return journey was quieter than the ride out. Elias kept them moving at a steady pace, but his eyes constantly scanned the surrounding terrain. Every snapped twig or scattered group of birds drew his attention. Lin Mei seemed to sense his wariness, keeping her voice low when she needed to speak. They camped that night in a different spot than before, Elias choosing a hollow that offered better protection and multiple escape routes. He built only the smallest of fires, just enough to warm their food, and extinguished it completely before they slept. Lin Mei took the first watch while Elias rested, her hand steady on the revolver he'd taught her to use. The second day of travel stretched long, the familiar landmarks slowly appearing as they worked their way back into the high country. Late afternoon sun slanted through the pines when they finally approached the ridge that overlooked their cabin. Elias pulled up short, his hand tightening on the reins. A thin column of smoke rose against the darkening sky, twisting up from where their cabin should be. Not the controlled smoke of a proper chimney fire, but the ragged drift of something burning wild. The sight sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Lin Mei gasped softly beside him. Elias touched his heels to his horse's flanks, urging the animal forward at a faster pace. The dread that had been building in his gut all day grew heavier with each step closer to the ridge. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The smoke thickened as they crested the final rise, its acrid scent carried on the evening breeze. In the gathering dusk, they could just make out the angry orange glow of flames licking at what remained of their cabin's walls. The sight hit them both like a physical blow, stopping them dead in their tracks. The smoke grew thicker as they approached the cabin. Clearing. Elias dismounted first, his boots crunching on scattered chunks of charred wood. Where their snug cabin had stood just days ago, only blackened beams reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. The air hung heavy with the stench of burned timber. And scorched metal. Lin Mei slipped down from her horse, her small hands covering her mouth as she took in the destruction. The roof had completely collapsed, and the walls were nothing but ash-covered skeleton frames. Their few belongings, the cookpot, the mended blankets, the fresh supplies, all reduced to twisted metal and cinders. "Stay close," Elias murmured, his hand resting on his rifle as he circled the ruins. The embers still glowed in places, suggesting the fire had been set sometime during their absence. His jaw tightened as he spotted fresh boot prints in the soft earth around the cabin site, multiple sets leading off toward the creek. A flash of pale bark caught his eye. On a young aspen tree at the edge of the clearing, crude letters had been carved deep into the trunk. Elias gestured Lin Mei over, though he already knew what the message would say. The words stood out stark against the white bark. "Give us the girl or the mountain takes you both." Lin Mei's fingers traced the rough letters, her face growing hard. "They burn everything," she whispered. "Always burn what is not theirs." "We're not staying to let them burn anything else," Elias said firmly. He helped her back onto her horse, scanning the deepening shadows between the trees. "I know a place. It's a hard ride, but we'll be safer there." They set off immediately, Elias leading them away from the marked trails and into the deeper wilderness. The sun had fully set by the time they reached the narrow valley where Angus MacLeod kept his winter trapline. Elias had known the half-Ute, half-Scot trapper for years, trading pelts and sharing campfires in the high country. If anyone could help them now, it would be Angus. A dog's bark echoed through the darkness, followed by a lantern's glow. Angus's tall figure appeared in the doorway of his cabin, rifle ready until he recognized his visitors. "Elias Creed," he called out, lowering his weapon. "Been a spell since you crossed my threshold." His dark eyes, sharp as a hawk's, took in Lin Mei and their travel-worn appearance. "Reckon you ain't just passing through." "Had some trouble up at Whitestone?" Elias explained as they dismounted. "Need a place to catch our breath, if you can spare it." Angus nodded slowly, gesturing them inside. Always room for friends in need. The cabin's interior was neat but sparse, with dried herbs hanging from the rafters and well-warmed furs stacked in the corners. A pot of coffee bubbled on the wood stove, filling the space with its rich aroma. Angus poured 3 tin cups while Elias and Lin Mei settled on rough-hewn stools. "I've got a line shack," Angus said, passing them the steaming coffee. "Up in the high meadow, past Thunder Creek. Nobody goes there this time of year. Might suit your needs better than trying to rebuild down lower." Elias wrapped his hands around the warm cup, gathering his thoughts. "Much obliged. But before you offer more, you should know what you're getting into." Over the next hour, he laid out everything finding Lin Mei, the spring deed, the threats, and now the burning of his cabin. Angus listened without interruption, his weathered face growing grimmer as the tale unfolded. When Elias finished, the trapper stood and added more wood to the stove, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Them mining operations," he said finally. "They're like a hungry bear. Won't stop till they get what they want or someone puts them down." He glanced at Lin Mei, who sat quietly sipping her coffee. "That spring of yours, it feeds half the creeks they use for their sluice boxes. They'll keep coming." "I know," Elias said quietly, "but I won't hand her over." Angus nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Line shack's yours as long as you need it. It ain't much, but it's defensible. High ground, good sightlines." He paused, studying the flames through the stove's grate. Might be time to send word to the territorial marshal, too. Man named Burke. He's got no love for mining companies burning folks out. The coffee had grown cold in their cups by the time they finished planning. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its cry echoing off the valley walls. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, they had found sanctuary in the shadow of the mountains. Morning sunlight filtered through the pine boughs as Elias and Angus sat on rough-hewn logs outside the line shack. Steam rose from their tin coffee cups while they spoke in low voices, working out the details of their plan. The distant sound of Rena and Lin May's laughter drifted from the garden patch where they worked together. Public confrontation's risky, Angus said, running a hand through his graying hair. But might be our best chance. Them mine owners don't like folks knowing their business. Elias nodded, watching an eagle circle overhead. That deed's legal, registered proper with the territory office. They can't dispute it without showing their hand. True enough. Angus scratched his chin thoughtfully. Sunday after service, most folks'll be there, miners too. Make it harder for anyone to try something bold in front of witnesses. The sound of chopping drew their attention. Near the garden, Lin May was helping Rena split kindling for the cook stove. Rena's dark hair gleamed in the sun as she demonstrated the proper technique, speaking slowly in her native Ute. Lin May repeated the words carefully, her face brightening when Rena nodded approval. To quip, Lin May said, pointing at a pine tree. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but Rena's warm smile showed her pleasure at the effort. She's quick to learn, Angus observed, his voice soft with pride for his wife's patience. Rena says she's got a good heart. Elias watched as Lin May successfully split a piece of wood, her delighted laugh echoing across the clearing. It was the first true smile he'd seen from her since finding her in that cabin. Reckon she does at that. They spent the morning drafting the notice, choosing each word with care. It needed to be clear enough to draw attention, but careful enough not to provoke immediate retaliation. Angus suggested adding a reference to matters of public record, language that would catch the territorial judges. If things went badly by late afternoon, Elias prepared for the ride into town. He checked his rifle, making sure the action was clean and smooth. Lin May approached as he tightened his saddle cinch, her face serious. "You be careful," she said, her English still halting but improving daily. "Bad men watch always." "I'll keep my eyes sharp," he promised, touched by her concern. "Stay close to Angus and Rena. They'll keep you safe." The sun was low in the sky when Elias rode into Whitestone, casting long shadows between the buildings. A few miners lounged outside the saloon, falling silent as he passed. He tied his horse in front of the white-painted church, its weathered cross standing stark against the darkening sky. The notice, written in his careful hand on sturdy paper, felt heavy in his pocket. He withdrew it slowly, aware of eyes watching from various windows. Using 4 brass tacks, he secured it firmly to the church door where it couldn't be easily torn down. Notice of public record, it read. All interested parties are hereby invited to attend a matter of public record concerning water rights and property deeds in Whitestone Township. Sunday next, following morning service. Signed, Elias Creed. As he stepped back from the door, movement across the street caught his eye. Sheriff Raleigh stood in the shadow of the Mercantile's awning, one thumb hooked in his gumbelt. Their eyes met briefly, the sheriff's gaze hard and calculating, before Elias mounted up and turned his horse toward the hills. The ride back to the line shack was tense, every snapping twig making him scan the growing darkness. Relief washed over him when he finally dismounted in the small clearing, greeted by the warm glow of lamplight through the window and the smell of rabbit stew. Inside, Lin May sat at the rough table with Rena, stringing beans they'd picked at. Morning. She looked up as he entered, concern clear in her eyes until he nodded that all was well. Angus passed him a bowl of stew, the rich aroma filling the small space. Deeds posted? The trapper asked quietly. Done, Elias confirmed, settling. Onto a stool. Sheriff was watching. Wordle spread quick enough. Quick enough. The weight of what they'd set in motion settled over him as he ate. Sunday would force everything into the open. No more shadows, no more threats in the dark. But if it went wrong, they could lose everything. The mine owners had money, influence, and men willing to use violence. All Elias had was a legal deed, some loyal friends, and the hope that enough townspeople would stand against injustice. When faced with the truth, Lin May seemed to sense his thoughts. She placed a small hand on his shoulder as she cleared his. Empty bowl. We stay together, she said firmly. All friends, strong like mountain. Rena smiled at the girl's use of a Ute saying, and even Angus nodded approvingly. Their quiet confidence helped ease some of the tension in Elias's shoulders, but he knew the real test was still to come. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in gold as Elias buttoned his least-worn shirt, the fabric stiff from washing. Through the line shack's small window, he watched Lin May and Rena walking back from the stream, their arms full of fresh-picked wildflowers for the church. Angus sat at the rough table, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Beautiful morning. For a showdown, Angus remarked, his weathered face serious despite the light tone. Elias nodded, checking that the deed was secure in his vest pocket. The paper felt thin, almost fragile, but it carried the weight of law. He'd read it so many times he knew every word by heart. Lin May entered, wearing a clean blue dress borrowed from Rena. She'd woven mountain bluebells into her dark hair, and her eyes were steady when they met Elias's. Ready, she said simply. The ride into Whitestone took longer than usual, their horses picking carefully down the muddy trail. Church bells rang across the valley, their clear tones carrying on the crisp morning air. Other riders and wagons converged on the white-painted building, dust rising from the road. Elias helped Lin May down from her horse, noting how the arriving townspeople stared and whispered. Angus took a position near the church steps, his presence alone enough to discourage any immediate trouble. Inside, the morning sun streamed through high windows, catching dust motes in shafts of light. The wooden pews were filling quickly. Miners in clean shirts sat with their families, while the mine owners occupied the front row in store-bought suits. Sheriff Raleigh leaned against the back wall, his badge catching the light. Reverend Halley stood at the pulpit, his gentle face showing no surprise at their arrival. He'd been told what was coming. Lin May sat between Elias and Angus, her back straight, refusing to shrink from the stairs. The sermon spoke of justice and mercy, of doing right in God's eyes. When the final hymn faded, Reverend Halley nodded to Elias. Brother Creed has a matter to bring before the congregation. Elias stood, feeling every eye in the room. He withdrew the deed from his vest, carefully unfolding it. His voice, though quiet, carried clearly in the hushed church. This here's a legal deed, he began, registered proper with the Colorado Territory Land Office. He read the formal language, the dates, the precise description of the spring and its water rights. Signed and witnessed, granting full ownership to Miss Lin May Chun. Gasps rippled through the congregation. One of the mine owners, red-faced, started to rise, but was pulled back by his partner's grip on his arm. That spring feeds 3 mining operations, Elias continued. We ain't looking to stop that. Miss Chun offers fair water access to all, in exchange for the town's pledge of protection. He turned to face the mine owners directly. For her and her cousin at the Iron Bend Mission. Legal protection, witnessed here today. Sheriff Raleigh pushed off from the wall, his spurs clicking on the wooden floor. That's a mighty generous offer, he drawled. considering some might question how that deed came to be signed. The previous owner wrote it proper, Elias replied evenly. Before he disappeared. Territory office has it recorded. Reverend Hawley stepped forward, his Bible in hand. I've seen the territorial records myself. The deed is valid under Colorado law. Murmurs filled the church. Wives whispered to husbands. Miners looked at their bosses, then at Lin May, who met their gaze without flinching. The mine owners conferred. In harsh whispers. Finally, the elder of them stood. Access to the spring stays unrestricted? You'll have your water, Elias confirmed. Long as Miss Chun and her kin stay safe. The town will witness, Reverend Hawley added, producing a document. From his Bible. A written pledge of protection to be signed here and now. The mine owner's face worked through several expressions before settling into resigned acceptance. Ain't much choice, is there? Not with half the county watching. He stepped forward, took the offered pen, and signed. Sheriff Raleigh followed, then other prominent townspeople. Each signature added weight to the promise, binding the community to Lin May's safety through bonds of law and neighborly duty. When the last name was dried, Reverend Hawley held up the document. Let it be known that Whitestone stands by its own. Miss Chun and her family are under our protection now, as God and these witnesses can testify. Lin May stood, bowing slightly to the congregation. Thank you, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. Water brings. Life is good to share. The tension in the room eased, replaced by something closer to respect. Even some of the miners' wives smiled, perhaps seeing for the first time the young woman behind their fears and prejudices. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hillside as Elias, Lin May, and Angus surveyed the land above the spring. Fresh grass had begun pushing through the ashes of the old cabin, nature already working to heal the scorched earth. The air smelled of pine sap and spring flowers, washing away the lingering scent of smoke. Good spot here, Angus said, stomping his boot on a level patch of ground. Better than the old place. Can see clear down to town, and the spring's just yonder. He gestured toward the bubbling water that emerged from rocks below. Elias nodded, already marking trees in his mind. Reckon we'll need 20 good logs to start. Make it solid this time. Lin May walked the perimeter of their chosen site, counting steps. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, ready for work. Vague. Enough for winter storage. She asked, her English growing stronger each day. We'll make it plenty big, Elias assured her. He pulled his axe from the pack mule's load. The steel head gleamed, freshly sharpened. First thing is teaching you how to notch these logs proper. They started with a fallen pine, its wood still sound. Elias demonstrated the careful axe work. Needed to create the corner joints, showing Lin May how to measure twice before cutting. Her small hands proved steady with the tool, though she needed more swings to bite as deep as his. Like this? She asked, stepping back to show her work. Elias ran his fingers over the notch. That's fine work. Better than some men I've seen. A smile brightened her face, pride replacing the shadows that had lingered there since the burning. She attacked the next log with renewed energy, humming a melody that drifted on the mountain air. Angus returned from scouting with news of a stand of straight pines just over the ridge. Good timber there, he reported, wiping sweat from his brow. We can start hauling tomorrow at first light. They made camp as the sun set, sleeping under the stars. Dawn found them already at work, Elias and Angus felling trees while Lin May stripped branches and measured lengths. The hollow ring of axes echoed through the hills, marking time with their labor. Days blurred together in a rhythm of cut and haul, notch and stack. Their hands grew calloused, clothes stained with pitch. But the log pile grew steadily, each piece bringing them closer to shelter. Lin May's cooking kept their strength up. Rabbit stew, foraged greens, cornbread when supplies allowed. Her laughter, hesitant at first, began to return. It started with small things, a Jay stealing bits of breakfast, Angus cursing a splinter, the way morning fog made their breath dragon-like in the chill. Each laugh seemed to lift a weight from all their shoulders, like spring thaw breaking winter's grip. One evening, as they sat resting against the growing wall of logs, hoofbeats sounded on the trail. Elias reached for his rifle, but Lin Mei was already standing, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Her voice lifted in sudden joy. "Chun Wei, cousin." The rider was indeed her cousin from Iron Bend, leading a mule that carried mysterious bundles. He dismounted with a wide smile, embracing Lin Mei as she ran to meet him. From the mule's pack, he carefully lifted a slender tree, a peach sapling, its roots wrapped in damp burlap. "For new home," he explained in careful English, presenting it to Lin Mei. "From Mission Orchard. Very strong tree, bear much fruit." Lin Mei touched the sapling's leaves with gentle fingers, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered in Chinese, then turned to Elias. "Where should we plant?" They chose a spot where the spring seep would reach its roots, protected from harsh winds by a natural fold in the hillside. All four of them helped dig the hole, making it deep and wide. Lin Mei settled the sapling in place, speaking soft words in Chinese as she spread the roots. The roots. "What did you say?" Elias asked as they tamped the earth around the trunk. "Tell tree to grow strong," she replied. "Make sweet fruit for all who come in peace." She looked up at the half-built cabin walls, then at the people around her. Like, new home will do." Angus nodded approvingly. "Good medicine, that. Tree and home together. That's proper." They shared supper around the fire that night, Chun Wei adding dried fruit and tea from his packs to their meal. The peach sapling stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze like a promise of harvest to come. Later, as the fire burned low and Chen Wei told stories of news from Iron Bend, Elias watched Lin Mei's face in the flickering light. The fear that had haunted her features since he'd first found her was fading, replaced by something stronger, hope, taking root as surely as the peach tree in the mountain soil. The mountain spring rushed clear and sweet over moss-covered rocks, its voice a constant melody behind the steady thud of Elias's axe. May sunshine warmed the hillside, bringing out the scent of pine sap from newly cut logs. The cabin walls had risen steadily, each course of timber marking another week's labor. Down in Whitestone, attitudes had shifted like spring winds changing direction. Where once there had been whispers and sideways glances, now came cautious waves and morning greetings. The general storekeeper's wife, who had warned Elias away months ago, now set aside extra penny candy when Lin Mei came to trade. One afternoon, while Elias worked on smoothing the main room's crossbeam, the clip-clop of hooves drew his attention. Clara Finch rode past on her bay mare, parasol tilted against the sun. She glanced toward the rising cabin, but didn't rein in, continuing along the trail without a word. Her silence spoke volumes. The threat had ebbed like winter snow in sunshine. Elias returned to his work, carefully etching letters into the broad pine beam. His knife moved slowly, each stroke deliberate as he carved the words from Psalms. "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it." The scripture reminded him of his mother's Bible, read by lamplight in their Missouri home so many years ago. Near the cabin's east-facing door, Lin Mei knelt in the dark soil, her hands gentle around the peach sapling's roots. She had chosen this spot carefully, where morning sun would warm the young tree and the spring seep would nurture its growth. "In my village," she explained, patting earth around the trunk, "peach trees live 100 years. Take long time to grow big." She looked up at Elias, dirt smudging her cheek. "But they last, like good homes should." Elias paused in his carving to watch her work. The sapling stood barely taller than Lin Mei kneeling, its few leaves trembling. In the mountain breeze, small now, but already reaching toward sky and sun, putting down roots in this high place they'd chosen to call home. "Reckon you're right about that," he said softly. "The best things do take time to grow strong." By early summer, the cabin stood as testimony to months of shared labor. Fresh-cut pine logs gleamed golden in the sunlight, their joints tight and true. Sweet-smelling mud chinking sealed every crack against mountain winds, while new shingles crowned the roof like scales on a great sleeping beast. Inside, the hearth drew true, filling the home with warmth and the aroma of baking bread. On that first Sunday after moving in, sunshine streamed through the windows Elias had crafted himself. The rough-hewn table groaned under the weight of their celebration meal. Venison tender from Lin Mei's careful seasoning shared space with crusty loaves still warm from the oven. A jar of amber peach preserves from Iron Bend caught the light like liquid gold. Angus MacLeod's deep laugh mixed with the higher voices of children from the mission, who had taken to calling Elias Uncle Creed with easy affection. Lin Mei's cousins shared stories of their childhood in China, translated piece by piece, bringing smiles to every face. The cabin, so recently empty, now overflowed with the sounds of family. As evening painted the mountains purple and gold, Elias settled onto the porch, his chair creaking softly beneath him. From here, he could watch Lin Mei tending to the peach sapling, her movements gentle as she poured water around its roots. The young tree had already put out new leaves, reaching toward the sky with quiet determination. $11. That's what he'd paid for the cabin that cold April morning, not knowing he was buying so much more. He'd purchased the chance to stand between innocence and harm, to be the shield his sister never had. But life had given back far more than he'd spent. It had given him a family, pieced together from different languages and cultures, bound by something stronger than blood. The wind stirred the peach leaves, their whispered song mixing with children's laughter from inside. Elias didn't need any other answer than this, the simple peace of a summer evening, surrounded by those who had chosen to call each other family. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and promise, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at home. If this one resonated with you, stick around. I've got another story waiting for you tomorrow, and who knows, it might be just what you needed to hear.